Something that I've done on and off for 3 years or so is stream on Twitch. I'm 21 at the time and use streaming as a coping mechanism for PTSD-induced social anxiety. I was assaulted in the military and my assailant was let off the hook while I was medically discharged instead of taken care of, but that's a story for another time. I've been streaming League of Legends mainly, and without a job I've had plenty of time to try building a following and streaming through the night. I'm still fairly new to streaming at this point and haven't met many other female streamers, so I don't have much advice to go off when it comes to what I should and shouldn't do. You know the saying, hindsight is 20/20? Anywho, I digress. One night I'm streaming and someone named Checker or something DM'd me during the stream. For some reason it seems to generally be foreign guys creeping. He's talking and asking for my Skype. I'm like, okay, it's just Skype, so whatevs. I give it to him and he starts messaging me and calls. I remember he called, but I don't remember when during the stream, like if I paused it or something. I remember I heard his voice at one point. He starts off with some prodding questions, but really quickly starts getting personal, asking what I'm wearing, am I shaved. I tell him I'm uncomfortable and I'm not going to answer his question. He asks for pictures and I flat out reject him. He gets angry and tells me he's going to hack my computer and track me down. Midstream, I have a panic attack and shut everything off. What can I do? Can he really do that? I asked the stream. A follower I have actually become really close friends with called me and consoled me for at least an hour in the middle of the night. I didn't stream for a long time after that. A few weeks go by and I'm checking my email. I'm getting mailer demons saying my emails aren't going through. What emails? I haven't sent any since I applied to colleges. I look at my sent emails and I've been having spam sent out. What? I call Yahoo support and the usual Middle Eastern Indian support guy picks up. I'm on the phone with Yahoo and I'm angry. They're doing the remote check and they say that I've been infected with a virus with a funny name. I think it began with a K. The guy on the line says they'll scrub my email clean of any of the aftermath for $80 and I'm livid. Why should I have to pay for something some jerk did when you guys were supposed to be keeping my email secure? I refused to pay this guy and after multiple attempts at getting my credit card information, I hung up. I changed passwords and security questions whenever I could to reinforce security. I wiped my computer and basically started fresh. A month after the initial Skype incident, I got a call. I answered. Hello? Hello? No one talked, just hung up on me. This was before the barrage of robocalls everyone gets nowadays, and I was on a do not call list. I am a pretty strong-willed individual with a maybe too high level of self-respect. I was going to find out who called me and why. I called twice. Once was a pickup and hang-up. The next there was a pause. Hello? Why did you call me? What do you want? No response. Why did you call me? I just wanted to hear your voice again. Never call me again, creep! I hung up and started having an anxiety attack. I told my husband who called and what just happened, and he told me to call T-Mobile and have my number changed. I dialed 611 as soon as I could, all the while trying to keep my lunch down. The guy who threatened to hack my computer actually did it and got my cell number. I turned on my computer, logged into my Skype account, and screenshotted all of his messages. I filed a report with Microsoft, Twitch, and called my local police department, though with the situation, they didn't have much they could give except advice. Microsoft assured me that they were taking this matter seriously and going to ban his account. All my passwords were changed to any sort of email or online account, and I have unlinked any phone numbers. I later talked to streamers who have had something similar happen, or even had a somewhat successful attempt of their identity stolen. I say somewhat because they were later arrested. I stopped streaming for a year until one of my friends peer pressured me, saying how much she missed watching me and hanging out online. I restarted streaming and stopped using Skype altogether. But I hope I never have to run into this checker guy again. So a few days was the last great pit party before the beginning of the new school year here. For those unfamiliar, a pit party is basically when a bunch of us high schoolers meet at a gravel pit outside of town, drink, blast your stereotypical small-town country music, and burn leftover pallets. Someone usually decides to put a pit party on and is in charge of organizing everything out there too. This party in particular was supposed to have people from over 100 kilometers away show up for one last hurrah, meaning that you were bound to actually meet some new people at this one. I showed up to the pit at around 10 p.m. with a friend of mine, we'll call her Katie, and already there were a ton of people we both knew and didn't. At the entrance to the pit, you could grab a glow stick that matches your relationship status as a fun little twist. Green for single, red for taken, yellow for DTF, blue for it's complicated, and purple for just here to party. Katie and I both had on a purple one, but before the main event of this story, I added a red one for a boyfriend I recently got. After a while, Katie and I both grabbed a twisted tea from the bag around my shoulders, and we found a girl we'll call Danielle. For a bit of context, Danielle easily fits herself in with the smokers and low achievers. At the time when she attended our school here, she was suspended within the first 5 days for having vodka stashed in her locker. Anyways, Katie, Daniela, and I all getting a little tipsy, though Katie and Danielle more than I. We would constantly go out behind the gravel pits to pee, in groups of course, and just go talk to people we haven't seen all summer. But here's where things start to go sideways. Danielle, Katie, and I are sitting on the side of the gravel hill, still facing the bonfire and just behind a group of boys. Then almost out of the shadows, 5 men are standing in front of us, blocking our view of everyone else in the fire. Already I was a little wary as why these guys are easily in their 20s were at a party hosted by and for teenagers. One of the guys is standing over us and he introduces himself as Lucas, and his other buddies are Tanner, William, Nathan, and Tyson. "So aren't you guys a little too young to be drinking?" Tanner said first. Katie spoke up, too drunk to get the vibes I was getting off these guys. Yeah, whatever." "So what are your names then?" Katie, Danielle, and I each stuck out our hands and replied, but I chose to leave my last name out. "How old are you?" 16, all 3 of us said back. "Well, we're 24, and Nathan over here is getting married soon. This is his bachelor party." "What?" Admittedly, I finished the drink I was on and could already feel the effects even while still sitting down. I glanced over and these guys whipped out a bong out of nowhere and are passing it around us. I pass but start feeling the alarm bells and red flashing lights telling me to haul it out of there. I look around the party trying to make eye contact with as many people that I knew. Without me realizing, Danielle and Katie wandered off on their own to leave me with these guys. That's when I feel an arm wrapped around my shoulder. It was Tyson, and he reeked of booze. "Oh, you're so cold, girlie. You better warm up." He said that so greasily I could barely swallow the words. He started rubbing my shoulders, and I kept looking around for someone to notice how uncomfortable I looked. Tyson noticed the red and purple glow sticks around my wrist. "Oh, so you're your boyfriend here tonight?" I should have just said yes, but yet I responded with a no. "Oh, so I guess you won't be needing this then." And with that, he was taking off the red and trying to slip on a yellow around my wrist. No, I really do need that one." However, a girl who had just graduated finally saw the look I was sweeping around the party and came up to me, whispering in my ear, "Are you all right?" "No, please help me." Loudly she said, "Okay, Sam, come to the bathroom with me." And it was over like that. I tried to talk to Katie about it a few minutes later, and she only had to say that she noticed that I didn't look okay. I understand that she couldn't have known what to do, but still, she knew. Those guys quickly booked it, and I thanked the girl profusely for getting me out of there. I know this could have ended much worse, but it was still a horrifying moment realizing that these grown men were trying to take advantage of me, leering like hungry hyenas at what they thought was a completely wasted teen. Ladies and guys out there, please watch out for your friends, and if you notice that anyone isn't comfortable in a situation like that, don't be afraid to try to make even the smallest of interventions. For some backstory, I'm a 19-year-old university student living in a small town in Australia, where nothing interesting ever really happens and people just cruise through life pretty relaxed. It was Tuesday and I was having a day at home because it was raining and I had a test that I really needed to study for. At about 11 a.m., I was starting to get cabin fever, so I decided to take my dog for a walk, seeing as there was a break in the rain. He is a West Highland Terrier called Hugo and is probably the cutest thing ever. Anyway, we set off on our usual route, which takes us along the streets of my suburb and partly through a nearby golf course because my dog likes to try and play with the kangaroos. This isn't important to the story, but it's pretty funny to watch. The place where this all went down was a park aptly named the Snake Park because, well, you can probably guess why. To explain this full story, I need to describe how the park is set up. The park has 3 entry points, 2 of which lead onto roads leading back to my house, and the other kind of a thoroughfare filled with bushes leading onto another, smaller park. Most of the park is surrounded by dense bushland, and behind it is on one side there are the backyards of a number of houses that face the park. This is important. So me and my dog were fooling around and playing in the sandpit of a kid's playground in the middle of the park when it started raining heavily. We found some shelter, and once it had stopped, I decided we should go home before it rained again. I should also mention that on my walk and in the park itself there was nobody, probably because people have stuff to do at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. I started walking to one of the exits that led to the road back to my house, my dog behind me sniffing bushes. This exit is exactly directly opposite the one with the thoroughfare and was pretty far away, maybe 500 meters, and was pretty obscured from view. After walking for a bit, I looked behind me to check if my dog was following me, but he had disappeared into the bushes a few meters away, so I went back in order to get him and called out his name. "Hugo, come here, boy." This is where it got strange. As soon as I said that, the quiet and silent surroundings erupted with noise. It was as though there were tiny microphones in the trees amplifying the sound of a woman shouting and screaming into a microphone or some sort of amplifying system. I could not understand what she was saying, but the sound waves were so strong that I could literally feel my body pulsate as the sound reverberated throughout the park, and my dog cowered behind me. Despite the sheer volume of noise, I could not work out where it was coming from. Logic told me that it was probably coming from the group of houses coming from the other side of the park, but it was impossible to tell. Surely if it had been coming from a specific house, the noise would have traveled and I would have been able to identify its location. Instead, it felt as though it was coming from all directions, left, right, and even above my head. After about 30 seconds, the screaming and shouting stopped, and my dog and I looked at each other pretty shaken up. Looking for an answer, I thought maybe it was me. After all, it did happen after I called Hugo's name. So I tried again and called, "Hugo, come here, boy." Once again, the park erupted in the screams of a woman. The noise was so loud, and yet I couldn't understand what she was saying. It was like being right next to the speaker at a rock concert. There was too much pressure on my eardrums to actually make out any words. But again, after maybe 20 seconds this time, the noise stopped and my dog and I booked it onto the main road. Now, if you've gotten this far, you're probably thinking, what? This is weird. It was probably just some neighbor playing with a sound system. That's what I thought too, but there are a number of weird things about this. The first is that the volume of the noise was like being at a rock concert, but in the middle of a quiet suburb. Who has a sound system that loud? And secondly, after this happened, my dog and I sat near the main road for a while near the park, wondering if maybe somebody would come and investigate the noise, but nobody came. Eventually, on our way home, we met another dog walker and asked if they had heard the woman screaming, and they replied that they hadn't, and they'd been home all day. It should also be said that I've lived in this suburb for more than a decade, and nothing like this has ever happened. When I got home and started to tell my sister what happened, the noise started again. Now my house is about 5 kilometers away from the park, so if I could hear it from there, it must have been pretty loud, no? I asked, "Can you hear it?" to which she replied, "Yeah, actually, I can." So it could have a logical explanation, but it just shocked me quite a bit. Has this happened to anybody else, or was it simply my imagination? Either way, I'm never going to that park alone again. School lockdown drills are as common as fire drills. I'm sure every school or county has their own style or individual protocol, but essentially it's the same across the board. Everyone is to get into a classroom, lock the door, turn off the lights, group into a part of the room out of view from the windows and doors, and stay completely silent. The goal is to disappear from whatever hypothetical active individual is roaming the hallways. Without these drills, well, the same thing would happen when a school invader first started popping up. Chaos, people fleeing in all directions, creating a frenzy of targets to choose from, and most people would end up in a very terrible situation. Was a counselor for an elementary school. My last position was my second, the first being in a terrible place for 2 years. That first elementary school was a mess, mostly because of the principal. He was old and tired, walking the halls with frazzled white hair and wrinkled button-up shirts with no tie. He seemed he was over it all, counting down the days until his retirement. He showed little interest in my role, practically rolling his eyes at whatever issue brought a child to my door. He clearly had the whole "this generation is soft" mentality. Kids aren't depressed or anxious, they're just whining. He handed out reprimands and punishments without any real investigations and treated the staff poorly, and he slacked on drills. I remember being horrified on my first fire drill there, standing out in the playground in the near-freezing autumn breeze, surrounded by cold and confused students as scattered and disorganized as staff tried to somehow get accountability. The staff and I tried to schedule more drills, tried to get him in on planning, but he could care less. Eventually, he was relieved when teachers had had enough and went to the board, but by then I lost motivation and needed to change. Where I ended up next was refreshing. The principal, a tall and slim middle-aged man with a square jaw and kind eyes, always wearing some version of a cartoon-themed tie, and the staff here take their jobs rather seriously, almost to the point of me feeling too intimidated to share ideas during meetings when I first arrived. Fortunately, I loosened up over time, and when everyone saw how much I cared for the children, I was accepted. I loved it there. I quit 2 months later. The reason I quit is something I haven't quite gotten over. I still dream about it. I still hear the sounds that didn't make any sense as they were happening, but came together afterward in a horrific realization. I had been making my rounds that day, checking on my more needy students during their classes, making sure no one was on the verge of a meltdown or anything. I remember feeling relieved to be walking around because I had been sitting in the nurse's office with a first grader who ran and slipped on the slick floor. The custodian was in the middle of mopping. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with the child, but I advised the custodian to put up a "caution wet floor" sign before we had a lawsuit on our hands. I was feeling good until... Lockdown! 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 It was one of the office administrators over the loudspeaker. At first, I was just surprised. Then I felt my heart jump, and my fingertips turn icy as I realized the reason I was surprised. There was no drill scheduled that day, which meant this was not a drill. When the announcement blared, I just opened the door to peek into a kindergarten classroom. When the overhead speaker clicked, indicating the end of the announcement, my eyes met with the teacher's, Mr. Jameson. We froze, staring at one another for a good 3 seconds, her standing with a pointer in one hand with her class all neatly seated in the carpet area. The students were silent, some looking at her and some at me. Then she and I came to do some kind of unspoken agreement. Training kicked in. We both sighed casually and smiled down at the kids. Mrs. Jameson said, "Well, kids, looks like we got a lockdown drill. Let's show Miss Vasquez how well we can do." "Sounds good to me," I said as I closed the door and pulled down the curtain to the door's tiny window. "I'd love to see how the class does during a lockdown drill. I might have some rewards if you do well." Then I remembered something. I said to the teacher, "Janet, I'll be right back," before running out of the room. I had remembered the fourth graders were around the corner from where I was, outside their classrooms and scattered all around the hallway putting up holiday decorations. I was afraid of the chaos that might ensue, kids pushing and shoving to get back to their own classrooms instead of just ducking into the nearest one, as was protocol. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Everyone was calm and well-versed on what to do. I herded some lingering and confused kids into rooms and was about to run back to the kindergarten room when I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. When I turned around, I couldn't help but mutter, "Seriously?" At the end of the hallway, sitting just outside the edge of sunlight that casted through the windows of the double-door exit nearby, was a third grader. He was curled up, knees to chest, hood pulled over, but I knew who it was. Charlie. Probably doodling in his stupid sketchbook, listening to music even though electronic devices were banned. The school had warned him dozens of times, but he always manages to sneak his phone in. Honestly, I spotted him a few times with the buds in his ears but let it go. Music and drawing were his thing, and he had a rough time at home. I ran over, pulled his hood back, and yanked the earbuds out of his ears. "Lockdown, sweetie. Come on." I was tempted to sound more urgent, but I wanted to remain casual and not alarm him. Charlie, like all students in that school, took lockdown drills seriously. His eyes widened and he jumped up. We ran over to the nearest room, the computer lab, and I used my key to let him in. Then I hesitated. The right thing to do would be to go in with him, but I thought about Mrs. Janet Jameson. She was young, her second year teaching, and her IA was out sick. I felt I had to help her manage those kids. There was no telling how long this lockdown would last, and she needed the help. I closed the door, turned. I realized I was probably the last one still in the hallway. It was eerie not having another soul in the hallway. It felt abandoned. No, hollow was the right word. It felt like a hollow, a cave. I heard footsteps, rhythmic thuds on the linoleum floor. Boots? No, they were softer than that, although too heavy to be sneakers, or maybe the person making them was big. It was not too far off. I guess I should explain the layout. The school is only one story. From a bird's eye view, the hallways carve out what looks like two cubes closely stacked on top of each other, the top being where the entrance was. These two cubes were fused together by the same middle hallway. I was at the far bottom of the bottom cube, close to the left corner. The footsteps sounded as if they were coming down the left side of the top cube, so that if I were to turn down the left corner, I'd end up far away yet face to face with whoever was there. The main problem was that Janet Jameson's room was down that left side hallway. I took off my flats and tiptoed to the left corner. I was tempted to look back, to just peek, but at the same time was too scared the person would see me. The steps stopped and I heard a hard rattling. He was trying a door. When it didn't open, I heard him whisper something, probably cursing to himself, before continuing to walk. And it was a him, judging from that whisper. The voice was too deep to be a woman. I don't know why I waited there, listening to the footsteps coming my way. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly because I could have just went into the nearest room, yet I had an anxious one-track mind of getting to Mrs. Jameson's room. The man tried another locked door, another hoarse whisper. I thought I could just sprint to the room, unlock the door, and rush in. No, he'd see me and that would only draw attention to Mrs. Jameson's room, thus endangering the children. Plus, what if I couldn't get the key in and unlock the door in time before he ran up to me? I took a backward step, preparing to run and sprint to the right corner if he got too close, when I heard a shift in the echoing steps. I listened and realized he turned down the middle hallway. I drew in a deep breath and exhaled shakily as I braved to peek around the corner. I was right. I saw no one and yet heard another door being tried, so he had to be down that middle hallway. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Jameson's door opened without a sound. I saw her face appear within the darkness of the room. Our eyes met and she beckoned me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to wait any longer and risk freezing up. I ran and made it in. As soon as I did, Janet carefully closed the door. I saw all the kids cluster in the darkest corner of the room, sitting and staring expectantly at me. "What are you doing?" I whispered harshly to the kindergarten teacher. "You were not supposed to open the door during a lockdown." "Well, you're welcome," she sighed. "I just had a bad feeling because you said you'd be back. Plus, after I heard the last door close, I heard a couple of your steps. I assumed they were yours because they clicked like shoes and just knew you were still out there." My shoulders slumped. I could no longer hide my relief or gratefulness. "Thank you, Janet." I saw her teeth show in the dark as she smiled. "No problem. Just help me keep the kids calm." And we heard a noise outside. It wasn't close, but it was strange, like a heavy thud. "What's that?" asked one of the kids. We shushed him and listened. Silence. Nothing happened for the next 20 or so minutes. Janet and I handed out coloring books and crayons for the kids to color. We made sure to hand out every one for every color. It sounds petty, but the last thing we needed was kids asking to borrow colors and start bickering over it. One of the little girls didn't color. She just stared at us with worrying and waiting eyes. She knew this wasn't a drill. I sat down in one of the small chairs and I signaled her to come to me. She immediately ran over, sat in my lap, and buried her head into my shoulder. I put my arms around her and whispered reassuring words. The rest of the class noticed this, and unfortunately, it seemed to make them anxious. Just then we heard footsteps. We all stiffened. The steps were coming our way. Janet and I met eyes. She was completely pale. The footsteps seemed heavier and less rhythmic. At one point there was some shuffling and some rubbing or dragging of clothes. The man must have stumbled and slid against the wall. Was he hurt? Then the steps resumed, getting closer still. My eyes shot toward the door. The girl and I gripped each other hard with rigid bodies. We felt almost fused as one statue. There was a ringing in my ears, and my eyes burned as I stared unblinkingly at the doorknob. Then bang! It was as if someone threw their weight into the door. The kids screamed. Janet screamed. I almost did, but instead put the girl down and ran over to Janet and shook her by the shoulders. She stopped screaming, and I pointed to the horrified children. At that moment, intense weight seemed to come upon us. I felt everything fade away for a moment. The screaming, the darkness of the room, the single heavy knock against the door that followed after the bang, and within our gaze we came to a mutual declaration. The kids. We both thought it. We had to keep them safe, and that was all that mattered. "The bookshelf," she blurted. I understood and nodded. In response, I said, "Use the blanket, okay?" She nodded, also understanding. Then we separated. I ran to the bookshelf and began pushing. It was used to hold other supplies like containers of extra glue sticks and yarn, not books, so it was not as heavy as it could have been, but it was heavy. "Shannon?" I got it. The shelf slid across the room, getting easier as I built momentum. The kids were still screaming, but had started to quiet down. I glanced over and saw Janet had already draped the ends of a large green blanket over the coat cubby and another bookshelf, so it hung over everyone, like a makeshift tent. Good. It would give the kids a sense of feeling hidden. I heard Janet trying to talk them down. By now the man was trying the doorknob, and I heard a low grunt. I kept pushing, and finally, with gritted teeth and every muscle in my body hard as rock, I made it. I turned the shelf the long way and rested against the door. I turned my back to the shelf and leaned against it. "Where's Miss Vasquez?" a child cried out. Then the other kids followed and began anxiously calling out to me. "I'm here, guys." I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. "You guys are the fort, and I'm the lookout." Janet said, "Yes, she's the lookout. She'll tell us if we are clear or in danger. Miss Vasquez, are we clear?" "Oh, yes, the danger was here, but it passed. We're all clear, kids." As I said this, I prayed there wasn't another thrash against the door. There wasn't. It all stopped. The doorknob stopped jiggling, and silence. After a few minutes, I slid down to sit on the floor, still leaning against the bookshelf. As the silence settled in and I called out 5 all clears to the kids to offer consistent reassurance, my body began to slowly settle. The moment that crash against the door happened, I felt amped up, light on my feet, strong. In fact, I remember when one of these bookshelves were being moved from one classroom to another, It took 2 custodians, grown men, to slide it along with a struggle. I had managed it alone. It was all adrenaline, and now with the kids calm enough to be singing softly along with Janet under the blanket, I was crashing. To top off my sense of ease, I saw flashing red and blue lights coming in through the windows. It was over, and I felt sick. I even smelled copper in the air. I rubbed my nose to check for a nosebleed, but strangely saw nothing. I looked at lights dancing around the ceiling. "Yay, guys," I called in a fakest, peppy voice. "The policemen are here." They had seen the lights and were already cheering. I tried to say something, I can't remember what, but it was probably to remind them that they still had to remain quiet. Rather than words, I let out a gut-tightening heave. Not much came out, just enough for me to spit. I felt something. Since I was no longer sweating and my skin felt cold and clammy, I became aware of some warmth beneath me. I was sitting in a puddle. I frowned. I soiled myself, I thought. Great. I shifted to examine my jeans to see if it was urine or feces. I saw darkness on the beige tile. I hesitantly touched it. It was too thick to be urine, and I didn't smell anything, or rather, I didn't smell any bodily waste. That coppery scent from earlier was stronger now. As I leaned away from the bookshelf, I saw the liquid hadn't come from me, but from beneath the bookshelf. No, not the bookshelf. It came from under the door. A stone dropped in my chest as I realized what the liquid was. It was blood. Blood had been oozing into the room. Noise came from the hallway. The calm rumble of footsteps, deep voices and casual conversation, and chaotic static from walkie-talkies. The police, and it didn't sound like they were in a rush. We all heard them coming closer. Then they stopped walking. They stopped walking, and they stopped talking. The only thing we could hear were the walkies. Why were they just standing there? Then someone among them broke the silence with some expletives before a sturm of urgent footsteps came and stopped right outside Janet Jameson's door. Eventually, the all-clear was given to every class except ours. Janet and I didn't protest or ask any questions. We were too confused, too overwhelmed and worn out. We were all at a point of absolute submission because we thought obedience would make things go faster and we can just all go home. I asked Janet for the blanket to cover myself and the pool under me before she turned the lights on and allowed the kids to stretch out. I whispered to her about the blood, and she only threw her head back and closed her eyes as if to say, "What else?" After an hour, the window gates were unlocked. Janet, the kids, and I exited the class through the windows so we didn't have to open the door and see whatever was happening. I looked stupidly at one of the officers after climbing out of the window and said, "I have blood on me. It's not mine." I just said it. I felt I had to before they noticed it themselves. The officer just nodded grimly with no sign of surprise. Then he escorted Janet and I to sit at the open end of an ambulance to be examined. When the medics gave the thumbs up, 2 officers came over. At first they just stood there, heads up but eyes staring at the ground. Then they removed their hats and told us there was a dead body in front of Janet Jameson's classroom door. What do you say to something like that? They paused, as if giving us room to react or respond. Janet and I just looked at one another. They looked at us. What did they want us to say? As it turns out, they weren't waiting for a reaction. They were giving us a moment to let the news sink in before they hit us with another. This time we reacted. This time we jumped up, asking what they meant, asking why and how. We freaked. We acted like they told us the sky just fell. The dead body was the principal. The officer tried to calm us. When we were finally able to sit and listen, one of them offered to explain everything. Then they looked at one another, agreeing on something before looking directly at me. "We could show you what happened." I tensed up. The officer quickly added, "From the cameras, he means. You don't have to see him. Watch the recordings." It seemed like the invitation was exclusively for me, and Janet didn't say anything. At the time, I didn't understand, but looking back, I think everyone felt I had a right to see. I think they felt I deserved a clear story because I'm the one with someone else's blood all over my pants. I was taken inside the building into the main office. A man with a polo and jeans was seated at one of the administrator's desks, his computer ready, waiting for me. With a nod from the officers, they escorted me in. The man in the polo hit play. There were 9 camera shots playing at once on the screen, 3 each row, all black and white. They all played pretty much the same thing at that moment, the beginning of the lockdown. Just kids through the halls, into classrooms. Each camera just showed incoherent blurs and shifting shades of gray. In less than a minute, the blurs disappeared and the hallway was bare. My attention was then drawn to 2 screens. One showed me, taking my shoes off and tiptoeing. The other showed the principal walking down the left side of the hallway. The principal stopped at a door and grabbed the door handle. The officer next to me said, "The school was transitioning to having new doors, correct? New locks?" We were. Our doors were old and were being upgraded, which meant new locks, which meant new keys. At that point, less than half the rooms in the building had new doors and not everyone had a key. He was checking the doors, making sure someone didn't end up in a room they didn't have a key to. Of course, I hadn't known that. With a stiff body and wide eyes, I watched my past self on the screen, cowering, truly believing I was in danger. The principal made the turn, and a moment later, I was dashing to Janet's room. I was gone. Now there was only the principal. After checking a door, he seemed satisfied, like he was all finished. He leaned into the door and seemed to speak before stepping back. The hoarse whispering. It wasn't cursing. It was him telling the people inside it was only him and not to be afraid. I saw the caution wet floor sign was 3 feet away. I noticed it because something in my gut knew what was going to happen next. The principal slipped. He did a brief little shuffle, almost comedically, before his legs came out from under him. His head bounced off the floor. There was no audio, but I could hear the hollow thump. I could hear it then in my head because I had heard it in real time. That heavy thud. The one from when we shushed the boy from asking what the noise was. Jesus, that was his head, I said aloud. No one answered. The principal slowly stood, leaving a dark splatter behind on the floor. His legs were shaky legs. He looked left and right, seemingly confused. He held one hand to his head and began to walk back the way he came. He stumbled. His knees shook. By now, darkness was dripping on the floor. Then he slowly sank to the ground as if he was suddenly sleepy and needed a nap. Then he just laid there. The man in the polo moved the computer mouse to slide the time bar to 22 minutes later. As it fast-forwarded, a dark mass appeared and grew in a perfect circle around the principal's head. The video resumed with the principal stirring. He stood and stepped back, seemingly horrified by the pool of darkness. He stepped around the puddle and walked. I squinted and saw he had dropped something. He rounded the corner, making his way to the closest room for help. Janet's room. He wavered on rubbery legs. At one point, he leaned against the wall as he walked a few steps, sliding along with his shoulder before pushing off and trying to balance again. He finally made it to Janet's door and fell against it. We had screamed. He raised a fist and gave one strong pound before trying the knob. He patted his pockets, looking around, slumped his head, and tried the knob again. The thing he had dropped, his keys. I felt hot tears running down my cheeks as I watched him sink down to sit with his back against the door. His head drooped. And that was it. The man in the polo stopped the video but kept looking at the screen. I shook my head, feeling confused even though there was nothing to be confused about. I thought about where I had been at that point in the video. I had been sitting with my back against the bookcase, which means he and I had been sitting back to back, just feet apart, while he slowly bled out. And I had sat in his blood, the blood that dripped down from his cracked head. The children sang softly as the darkness pooled and soaked into my pants. And it was me. I had kept him out. I didn't know. I felt cold and afraid. I stepped back away from the officers. I didn't mean to do that to him. The officer's face dropped. Well, no, ma'am. No, we aren't blaming you. We just felt you should know. Because I did it, right? I was losing sense of reality. I couldn't feel my legs and felt like I was somehow floating and sinking at the same time. I'm going to jail. I should. Because I kept him out. Ma'am, I shoved a freaking bookcase against the door. The officer was shaking his head, reaching out to me. I passed out. I quit being a counselor. Actually, I just stopped showing up. It was Janet who was kind enough to speak to the school county administration. She managed to turn my unannounced permanent absence into an official resignation. No one argued. No one asked me to sign or do anything. No one bothered me because they all knew. They all knew I let him die. Janet said they all feel sorry for us, her and I, that they all sympathized with our situation, but I know it's nonsense. I ripped up every get well card and popped every we miss you balloon that got delivered. They're all pretending, acting as if though I hadn't let Daniel Seymour Hutchins, a married man with 2 children at home and 253 others at work, slip away in an empty hallway alone. I don't call him by name. I prefer to remember him as the principal. It creates some distance, like we were only co-workers, strictly professional. Not at all like he was the shoulder I cried on when I broke up with my boyfriend, or the man who went over the spending limit for me when we did the blind gift exchange for Christmas. To top it off, we were never really in any danger. The police were called by a witness who claimed to see a man with a gun wandering the streets, drunkenly harassing people. When the police arrived, the man was in fact very drunk and did have a gun. A brief standoff between he and the police went on for half an hour before he gave up. Guess what? When the police examined the weapon, it turned out to be fake. It turned out to be a freaking paintball pistol. But that doesn't upset me nearly as much as the thought that still haunts me. I could have just looked. That's all I can think. There were 2 instances where I could have just looked and saved everything. The first time, I could have just poked my head around the corner and saw the principal walking my way. Then I could have put my shoes back on, stepped out, and gave him a wave, and he would have approached me and passed right by that yellow caution wet floor sign. The other time I could have looked was when I gave the second all clear to Janet and the kids. I can deny it all I want, but I had known. I had known at that moment something wasn't right because I just then realized we hadn't heard any footsteps walking away from the door. So why the silence, I had thought briefly, if they were still there. At that moment, I thought about standing up, reaching across the bookshelf and pushing the door window's curtain aside to peek out into the hallway. If I had, I would have saw the blood trail leading to the door. Then I would have looked down to see the principal slumped over. I would have shoved the shelf aside, opened the door, and used that stupid green 10 blanket to apply pressure and stop the bleeding. I would have done all of that, but I didn't. I didn't because protocol said stay away from the windows and doors, and plus, I was just plain scared. I ignored my gut and hid behind procedure. I was a coward. When I lay awake at night, I always hear a thump. What follows are the sounds of the principal walking and stumbling through my apartment. I can hear his feet on the linoleum even though I have a carpet. I hear his shoulder brushing against the wall. Then I hear the heavy crash and knock on my closed bedroom door. I can almost see the knob jiggling. At that point, I always get up and frantically pull the bedroom door open. I do it every time. And every single night, without fail, I collapse into tears when I see no one is there. I moved into subsidized townhouses when I was about 9 years old. This place was pretty shady. It looked nice, but it was far from it. I'm a female, and when I was younger, my mom was working about 2 to 3 jobs at a time to support me and my siblings. My oldest sister, Jenny, took care of us until she moved out of state and province when she was 15. When we moved in, there was a family living on the corner, a son, mom, and daughter. The son was about 7 to 8 years older than me and started becoming friends with my older sister. He would come over when she was babysitting and act friendly towards me, specifically me, practically ignoring my other siblings. So Bobby would come hang out with Jenny, and he always found a way to include me in whatever they were doing. Talking, play fighting, video games. He especially liked to play wrestle with me, which because of my older sister, I didn't really know that I should have been uncomfortable. Even when he would attempt to make me sit on his head. When Jenny stopped spending time at home, he started asking me to hang out. One of the times, he wanted to go for a walk, so we walked. There was a big church behind the townhouse complex that we walked to. He walked into a bush, poked his head out, and asked me to join him. He sat me down and began the most uncomfortable conversation I've had with an older kid. He said something along the lines of, "I like being friends with you, but I was thinking we could be more. Have you ever had a boyfriend before?" I shook my head and looked confused. "But aren't you 16 or something? Shouldn't you date someone your own age?" He laughed like it was a joke and asked again, "So, do you want to date me?" I rejected him and told him I needed to go home, that my other siblings would be worried. I ran home and told my middle sister, Serena, about what had happened. We lived there for about 5 years, and even though he stopped bugging me, especially when I started getting sassy and giving him smart responses, he started getting creepier. He would record and take pictures of the girls around the neighborhood, mostly between the ages of 4 to 12 years old. Most of them, thinking it was some stupid joke, would even pose and dance in front of his window for these. When we all played by the church, he would hide by the townhouses and watch until he was chased off by one of the parents or myself. I became the guardian kid around the neighborhood and the most trusted to take care of the others. I would talk to some of the parents about it, and they would tell me about how they would chase him off and loathed him for his disgusting habits. I never confronted his mom. She had her hands full with his sister, and his mom was really hateful to kids of the neighborhood, mostly because most of the kids would torment her daughters, so I believed it was best to keep to myself. I eventually told my mom, who, whenever she saw him, would give him a look that could kill, dagger stare. I'll never know what became of him, but I hope he got some karma for his depraved thoughts and behavior, and I hope I never run into this guy ever again. My name is Max, and I know this might sound like I'm just looking for some attention from people, but I just want to get this out because I'm still creeped out by this and what had happened to me and my ex-boyfriend, who is now still my best friend to this day. I'm 23 now, but at the time it happened I was 20. I was heading to town with my then boyfriend of 6 years, who I will change his name for privacy reasons, and him and I were still great friends for this. Anyway, that night, Jack and I were in my truck heading to Olive Garden at around 6 to 6:30 that night for dinner, and then head over to his house afterwards. Halfway through our meal, I noticed that there was some guy probably around late 30s or early 40s looking at us, but I brushed it off thinking he was probably just spacing out and happened to look our way, though I did let Jack know, so he was in the loop on what bothered me. Later, after we finished, I had paid and we left, but hadn't seen the guy when we got up to leave, so I figured he had left to go home, but I was dead wrong. As I began to pull out and leave, I saw headlights pull up behind me, though it could have been one of the countless other restaurant goers who frequent Olive Garden. That was until I noticed that it was the guy from earlier. Well, as I pulled out, so did he. Yet I was hoping he would leave the other way and it would be over with, right? Well, not exactly, because the moment I started heading towards Jack's house, the guy followed right behind, so I took the long way to his house because there are 2 ways there. One is a shortcut I would usually take, and the other is the longest way, so again I took the longest way, hoping to lose him on a road by the name of Nell's, and then down by the lake, to which I believe I lost him, so I drove okay. Up the road a ways to where it becomes a T-shape, I noticed the guy from before had showed his dirty face once again, and so I drove to the right past where I was supposed to pull into so I could try and lose him again. And by this time, I was scared, and Jack said, "Why is this guy so persistent on following us?" And tried to stick his head out the window to yell at the guy, but I stopped him. "Jack, he could have a gun, or even someone else with him who has a gun. You could easily get shot. Pull your head back in this truck." I yelled angrily to the point he pulled his head back in guiltily. I was finally able to lose the guy and drive Jack and I to the house and stayed there the whole night. Every other minute I'd look out the front window just waiting to see the guy waiting in the dark, no headlights on, when I noticed a car similar to the guy's car pull up and stop. He had no lights on and right across the street in front of one of my guy friends' house. Don't know if it's the guy from earlier or if it's another guy, but I'm glad I didn't wait to find out what the guy wanted to do to us, and I know I should have done something like call the cops, but I couldn't because my phone had died before getting to the restaurant, and I know I'm foolish, but at the time I forgot my charger. So yeah, yell at me, 'cause thankfully, we never saw that guy again. About 4 years ago, my family as a whole went through a few big changes. My parents had been empty nesters for about 3 years, as my siblings and I all lived in different states. After facing a huge letdown when they went to purchase their dream home, my parents unexpectedly had to move to a temporary rental home, not far from where we grew up. My brother-in-law had decided after 6 years he was going to leave the army in Texas and move back to our hometown in small-town Pennsylvania, my sister and 5 kids in tow. They had nowhere to go, and my parents reluctantly let them stay with them. My twin brother also chose that same time to leave the Navy, and I had been living with him as a nanny to my 3-year-old niece, Abby. I too begged to move back in with my parents, transferred my part-time job, and took Abby with me, so there were 5 adults and 6 little kids all living in a small 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. My brother still had several months to tie things over in Virginia, so he stayed behind. The new home was, I thought, quaint and had a lot of character. My mother, who had just found out she has cancer and still mourning the loss of her dream home, hated it. It was built in the 1800s and in fashion had all those great touches. High ceilings, closed-in rooms, and hardly any sunlight came through. It was also one story with a small attic filled with old things the landlord had chosen not to take, like an old crib and toys. And then there was the basement. Full length of the house, unfinished. It was split into 3 rooms. One of the rooms had remnants of the days coal was stored to heat the house with, but was open into the main basement. The other room, well, I hate to have that made-up horror cliché, but this is very true, was locked and only opened with one of those skeleton keys. My father opened the door just to peek inside. All that was in this room was one of those basement windows looking out to the side street of the house and one lone chair. Creepy, right? He decided that this is where my sister could temporarily store her belongings. Now, I moved in about 2 months after my sister and her family moved in. I was left to claim a small enclosed side porch, which was blazing hot at all hours of the day and night, no matter the weather. The kids splitting their sleeping arrangements between the smallest bedroom and living room, which was connected to my bedroom. It provided little privacy as the door was a glass door. I would have to creep over the kids early in the mornings to get to the bathroom to get ready for work. One particular morning I went to open my door, when I saw what looked like Abby bending down over her cousins. She was the only one with blonde hair, after all. It was 3 a.m., and as I opened my door to yell at her to go back to bed, the figure turned and ran down the hall towards my sister's room at the other end of the house. I forgot to mention, that particular room is above the locked basement room. As I stepped over the kids to go find Abby, I looked down and saw her sleeping soundly with the rest of the pack. Freaky. I let it go as a weird coincidence, and yet told my parents I thought the house was haunted. My father doesn't believe in ghosts, but my mother was very apprehensive. The house was an overall heavy place to live in. Lack of light made it seem like a dungeon. There were small strange occurrences noted by everyone, but we brushed it off as it was quite crowded and random noises could be made by just any child that was there. Now, one of my nephews has high-functioning autism. He always seems to know things others don't. My family had noticed in almost every picture of him he has orbs floating around him. I like to think that he has a good spiritual connection to that world. The kitchen has the door that leads to the basement right next to the main entrance. It also happened to be my nephew's favorite spot to hang around. He was always there talking to someone, or something. He never mentioned who, until one particular day we were all coming back from the store and was waiting for the door to be unlocked, when my nephew leaned into the window looking down into that basement room and waved. My mother asked who he was waving to. He said, "My friend, the Green Man." I'm assuming this is the same friend he is often caught speaking to in the kitchen. He went into great description of the green man, who also wore a long black coat and tall hat and lived in the basement. My sister was so freaked out, she took up an offer from our grandfather that day to move her family to a home 3 hours away, next door to him. My mother also chose to move about a month later and purchased our current home, next door to my sister. That left me with my father, who couldn't leave because of a contracted job, my twin brother, who finally got released from the Navy, and Abby. Abby and I spent our days out and about as much as possible to get away from that heavy feeling in the house. I also moved my room to the one above the basement. Every night I felt like someone was sitting on my bed next to me. I seriously felt like I was going to roll right off the bed sometimes. My hair was being pulled and my stuff constantly messed with, and went missing. I would randomly find things that belonged to my sister, even though the room had been empty when I moved my stuff in. I suppose I could blame Abby, as she was only 3 and a handful, but my brother had made amends with his ex, and Abby was spending more time with her mother than me. The incident that tops it all off, the one that made me up and move, happened in the basement. We had our washing machine and dryer down there, so every time I went to do laundry, Abby would follow me down and ride her tricycle, or we would roller skate on the smooth concrete floor while I washed my clothes. One day she was having a good time running around, so I decided that I would sit on the bottom step and let her wear herself out. There was a hula hoop my sister left sitting in a corner across from that creepy room. Abby pointed to it and asked if she could go over and get it. It was odd that she had asked permission, but of course I said sure. She cautiously approached it as though it was going to jump at her any second. When she reached it, she stared at the door to the creepy room, and stared, and stared. Then, as though she had been shocked, she turned around and ran to me and said, "We need to go upstairs right now." The door to the creepy room slammed shut, and we both bolted upstairs. I made my father get my laundry when we came home from work. He just laughed at me and said it was probably the wind, even though it's a closed-off fire hazard. Needless to say, I moved in with my sister that weekend. My brother told me later that Abby refused to go near the basement after that. A month after I moved, my sister, brother, and niece moved as well, though no other incidents were reported. I would love to know the history of the house. That room obviously had some bad juju hanging around it. This happened in my sophomore year of high school. I'm now a sophomore in college and am way more guarded when it comes to teachers or strangers in general. As a little backstory, I'll say this. Growing up, I was very shy and awkward when it came to social situations. I was also very innocent. I would barely speak to anyone normally and prayed that I wouldn't get called on in class in fear of stuttering or getting the wrong answer and then being laughed at for it. It was the first day of sophomore year. My classes were normal, math, science, English, etc. All of my teachers that I had looked familiar from my freshman year. There was only one new teacher that I hadn't seen before, and that was my American history teacher. I'll call him Mr. N. I remember my best friend Danny and I walking into American history class. We had seen Mr. N writing some stuff on the whiteboard, so we went and took the last 2 seats in the very back, so we could stay out of view for the most part. I didn't like the attention, and neither did Danny. After we sat down and got our supplies out, Danny leaned over and whispered to me, "The new teacher looks like a serial killer or something." I let out a small laugh because he wasn't wrong, but it wasn't nice that he said that, so I slapped Danny's arms and told him to hush. The teacher had turned around, introduced himself to the class. Mr. N was tall, but his form was very boxy. His hair was thin and stringy, and his head was shaped like a literal square. He also had a thin black line over his lips. At my immature age, I thought he had taken a Sharpie to his upper lip to make a small mustache. He wasn't the best-looking guy, but I didn't care about that. I just hoped his teaching was good. Sadly, it was not. He was all over the place. He would be telling us about World War I one day, and then go on and start talking about World War III, and then go to World War II. It was a literal mess. What really put me on edge about the guy was his creepy smile. He had a gap in his tooth, and when he would smile, he would widen his eyes to the point where it looked like it hurt. When he would talk to a student, he would open his eyes wide, not blink while talking to the student. He would also stare at students while we all wrote in a journal. 3 months into the year, I tried my best to avoid him. He never called on me and never looked my way, or so I thought, until one day when Danny told me that Mr. N kept staring in our direction. I acted like he was lying, but I knew he was telling the truth. I could feel the stare. Like I said, I hated the attention, and I felt like I was being picked out from everyone by this guy's stare. I looked up and had seen Mr. N shoot his gaze away from me. What the heck, I thought out loud. The small chitter-chatter of the room was interrupted by Mr. N standing up and passing out a sheet with missing work on it to the students. I still felt his gaze when he was handing out papers, but every time I looked up, he would be looking at the papers instead. Paranoia, I guess. I stared down at my desk when he came near Danny and I. I just felt uncomfortable. I waited for my papers to be placed in front of me, but it never showed up. So I looked up and Mr. N was just staring down at me, my paper in his hand. "You need to stay after class and discuss this with me," he said in a slightly higher voice. After he said that, he gave me that creepy smile and then handed me my paper, walking away. I remember looking at my paper and seeing how many missing assignments were there. I almost choked on air. There was no way that I had this many missing because I remember turning all of these in with Danny. I placed my head on my desk, feeling annoyed and panicked. Danny looked at my paper and went to pat my back. "You'll be fine. Just make sure to tell him that you turned these in. I'm sure he just misplaced them." The lunch bell rang, making all of the students rush out of the classroom. Well, everyone but me. I told Danny to save me a spot, and I walked over to where Mr. N's desk was. I coughed a little to get his attention. When I did, he shot his head up and smiled even bigger, if possible. I tried to tell him that I turned all of these in and that I can't have this knock my grade down. He just smiled and nodded his head. His response was what got me. "Oh, don't worry. I got them all here. I just wanted you to have to come and see me." I remember a chill went down my spine. I wanted to just walk out, but I felt bad about wanting to do that. I thought that he was just being nice. Like I said, I was innocent. "Oh, well, can you take these off as missing assignments if you have them?" He just laughed and got up. I got scared and felt so uncomfortable. "I will, don't worry. I was actually hoping you could help me with something." His voice was low and squeaky. He walked to the classroom door and closed it. I was crapping bricks. I didn't know what he was doing, but I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. "What do you need help with, sir?" I remember asking, my voice coming out shaky from fear. "Will you help me sort these papers? I could use a lot of help." He got closer to where I was, a desk separating us. I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded. "Oh, good. Here." He then came around the desk, went behind me, and put his hands on my shoulders, pushing me towards his desk. He then made me sit down in his desk chair, motioning to a stack of papers. I slowly picked up the papers and asked if I could go to another desk. He refused and said that I'm just fine where I am, and then sent me a wink. I shuddered, my heart beating really fast and wanting nothing more to run out. I started to sort the papers and felt him stare at me. I looked up to see him towering over me. I jumped in the seat, scooting back farther into the corner of the little space his desk was in. "You are a quiet little thing, aren't you? I like that. It's cute. Innocent." I felt like throwing up when he said that. He took a seat on his desk, then he started to move forward, so he was face to face with me almost. I couldn't go back anymore in the chair, and I knew I was trapped. He kept leaning into me, and I swear he was about to close his eyes and pucker his lips. I just panicked, so I jumped up, hit my knee on the desk, and whimpering since my knee wasn't in the best shape from falling down some stairs a week earlier. Mr. N jumped off from his desk, and I just ran around him out of the room and went to go find Danny. When I found him, I told him everything. I had to hold back from lashing out at the guy. Once I calmed down and Danny calmed down, We went up to the admin's office and turned him in. After telling the admins, they had me sit out and wait to be called again. I sat with Danny and just rested my head on his shoulder. I've never been so scared in my life. Later that day, I found out from another student that he had done this to other girls as well, but he only asked them to stay after, and all he did was ask personal questions, so they didn't feel the need to turn him in for being too invasive. The next day, I dreaded going to history class. Danny was angered and annoyed as well. It showed when he put his arm around my shoulder and shot daggers at Mr. N. When we walked in, however, as class went on, Mr. N acted like nothing had happened. In fact, he was avoiding me like the plague, which I was fine with. The next week, Mr. N didn't show up. Instead, one of the admins had told the class that Mr. N wouldn't be teaching anymore and that they were in the process of getting a full-time sub to fill in. Apparently, another girl went and reported him for doing something similar. I just have to say that I'm grateful for my best friend, who is now my fiancé, because after this whole thing, Danny started teaching me how to defend myself and to be stronger and more aware. He also made sure to scare away Mr. N when he approached us at some restaurant a couple years ago. To start, I have very bad eyesight. I am practically blind without my glasses and do not wear contacts. I tend to lose my glasses a lot by lying them around and forgetting where I put them, so I lay them next to my sink at night to retrieve them in the morning when I brush my teeth. This experience happened when I was 13. I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. My eyes were still adjusting, so when I looked around and noticed everything being so clear, I figured it was my mind playing tricks on me. After I relieved myself, I got up to wash my hands. Walking to my sink, I turned on a light and looked around. My eyesight was perfect. I was so confused at that moment, I shut my eyes. I was so confused and honestly didn't want to even open my eyes. When I did, however, it was the same as before. I walked to my sink as I put my glasses on and took them right off. When I did, it was back to being blurry. I put them back on and walked back to my bed, dumbfounded. Once I sat down, I don't remember anything after that. I woke up the next morning thinking that it was a dream when I went to my bathroom. I clearly remember putting my glasses next to my sink the night before, but they were nowhere to be found. I looked on the floor with no luck and decided to walk to my bed. I found them in between my bed sheets and put them on. I later told my mother, who was a believer of all sorts of weird stuff. She believed me but had no way of explaining it. I'm now 15 and have no way of explaining what happened that night. I know it was not a dream. It felt too real. Has this ever happened to anyone else? I was out for drinks with some colleagues when my mom came to get me, as I can't drive. The drive home begins as usual when we turn onto a road with two cars behaving oddly, one blue which seemed to be driving normally, albeit slowly, and a silver car which kept swerving dangerously close to the other car. As you do, we just suspected them to be friends messing around when the blue car sped up, clearly attempting to get rid of the silver. When the silver matches the speed, the blue drops right back again, only for the silver to match him. Obviously, Mom was getting frustrated sitting behind the silver as she has an early start at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow, so wants to get home, and honks her horn hoping to get him to move. He moves over in front of the blue and we continue driving, only for the silver car to pull back in front of us 30 seconds later. They continue in front of us, suddenly changing speeds, etc. around the large roundabout near my home, only indicating which direction after my mom had indicated. We drive along the final stretch of road before our estate, and my mom waits until the very last second to indicate, and silver still pulls in front of us. At this point, we're both kind of freaking out as they once again suddenly turn as soon as we indicate onto the road where our house is. Mom stops in the road, locks the door, and I call the police. When they realize we stopped, they do also, as I speak to the dispatcher. Finally, silver moves again, and we breathe in relief only for them to turn around and drive right towards us, while taking pictures of us, only swerving at the last second to stop next to us. My mom tells them we're calling the police in to go home. They seemed to drive off only to go further down the road and turn back around to come back towards us. The dispatcher tells us to drive to the police station, and thankfully we lost them on the way. The blue car did not seem to be involved, and only another victim of the harassment, so I hope he got home safe. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And if you want to support the page even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.